The Story of Civilization, Part 2. The Life of Greece, being a history of Greek civilization from the beginnings, and of civilization in the Near East, from the death of Alexander to the Roman conquest, with an introduction on the prehistoric culture of Crete, by Durant. Chapter 25, Egypt and the West. Section 4, Revolt. The lesson of Ptolemaic socialism is that even a government may exploit. Under the first two Ptolemies, the system worked reasonably well. Great engineering enterprises were completed. Agriculture was improved. Marketing was brought into order. The overseers behaved with a modest measure of injustice and partiality. That's a weird way to phrase it, right? Because if they were modest, why, in their approach, why do they have to be unjust and prejudicial, right? And though the exploitation of materials and men was thorough, its profits went in large degree to develop and adorn the country and to finance its cultural life. Well, partiality could also be in other things other than prejudice. It could be because you know somebody and then you give them more than their share or something. The Ptolemies went to war and spent more and more of the people's earnings upon armies, navies, and campaigns. After Philadelphus, there was a rapid deterioration in the quality of kings. They ate and drank and mated, and allowed the administration of the system to fall into the hands of rascals who ground every possible penny out of the poor. The fact that the exploiters were foreigners was never forgotten by the Egyptians, nor by the priests who dreamed of the flesh pots of Egypt that their class had enjoyed before the Persian and Greek domination. The Ptolemaic conception of socialism was essentially one of intensified production rather than of wide distribution. The fellah received enough of his product to keep him alive, but not enough to encourage him in his work, or in the business of rearing a family. Generation after generation, the government's exactions grew. The system of detailed national control became intolerable. Like the relentlessly watchful eye of a despotic parent, the state lent seed corn to the peasant to plant his crop, and then bound him to the farm until the harvest was in. No peasant might use any of his own product until all his debts had been paid to the state. The fellah was patient, but even he began to grumble. By the 2nd century, a substantial part of the soil had been abandoned for a lack of peasants to work it. The churches, the alarics, or the lessees of the royal land, could get no tenants to till it for them. They tried to do it themselves, but were not up to the task. Gradually the desert crept back upon civilization. In the gold mines of Nubia, the slaves worked naked in dark and narrow galleries, in cramping positions, loaded with chains, and encouraged by the whip of the overseer. Their food was poor, not even enough to keep them alive. Thousands of them succumbed from malnutrition and fatigue, and the only welcome event in their lives was death. The common laborer in the factories received 1 obol, 9 cents a day. The skilled worker 2 or 3. Every 10th day was a day of rest. Complaints multiplied and strikes grew more frequent. Strikes among the miners, the quarrymen, the boatmen, the peasants, the artisans, the tradesmen, even the overseers and the police. Strikes seldom for better pay, since the toilers had ceased to hope for this, but of simple exhaustion and despair. We are worn out, says a papyrus record of one strike. We will run away, i.e. seek sanctuary in a temple. Nearly all the exploiters were Greeks. Nearly all the exploited were Egyptians or Jews. The priests clandestinely appealed to the religious feeling of the natives, while the Greeks resented any concession made to Jews or Egyptians by the government. In the capital, the populace was bribed by state bounties and spectacles, but it was excluded from the royal quarter, was watched by a large military force, and was allowed no voice in national affairs. In the end, it became an irresponsible and violent mob. In 216 BCE, the Egyptians revolted, but were put down. In 189, they revolted again. The mutiny continued for 5 years. The Ptolemies won for a time by the force of their army and by raising their contributions to the priests. But the situation had become impossible. The country had been milked to depletion, and even the exploiters felt that nothing remained. Disintegration set in on every side. The Ptolemies passed from natural to unnatural vice, from intelligence to stupidity. They married with the freedom and haste that forfeited the esteem of their people. Luxury unfitted them for war or government. At last, even for thought, lawlessness and dishonesty, incompetence and hopelessness, the absence of competition and of the stimulus that comes from ownership lowered year by year the productivity of the land. Literature waned, creative art died. After the 3rd century, Alexandria added little to either. The Egyptians lost respect for the Greeks. The Greeks, if such a thing can be believed, lost respect for themselves. Year by year, they forgot their own language and spoke a corrupt mixture of Greek and Egyptian. More and more of them married their sisters after native custom or married into Egyptian families and were absorbed. Thousands of them worshipped what the Egyptians considered to be gods. By the 2nd century BCE, Greeks had ceased to be the dominant race, even politically. The Ptolemies, to preserve their authority, had adopted the Egyptian faith and ritual, and had increased the power of the priests. As the king sank into Epicurean ease, the clergy reasserted its leadership and won back, year by year, the lands and privileges which the earlier Ptolemies had taken away. The Rosetta Stone, dated 196 BCE, describes the coronation ceremonies of Ptolemy V as following almost completely the Egyptian forms. Under Ptolemy V, 203 to 181 BCE, and Ptolemy VI, 181 to 145 BCE, dynastic feuds absorbed the energies of the royal house, while Egyptian agriculture and industry decayed. Order and peace were not restored until Khasar, as a mere incident in his career, took Egypt with hardly a blow. And Augustus made it a province of Rome in 30 BCE. And now we're hearing much of the same call for socialism and communism and stuff, not realizing that there's people at the top that they're not going to lose stuff, and they are, going to get richer by this combination.